Yeah, welcome everybody who's managed to come along. Lots of familiar faces, also a few less familiar to PSNS talks. And for those people who are new to it, PSNS has been running this series called Curious Minds for a number of years. This year, obviously, because of COVID, we've had to resort to doing them online rather than in person at the Suter Theatre in Perth. It's possible we might get back to in-person ones after Christmas, but that remains to be seen. Anyway, I'm very much looking forward to tonight's. And Colin, I think some of you know Colin Moffat and others won't, but we're extremely lucky to have him. He has a long history in marine science. He's done a lot of work on methods assessment and contaminants. He worked at the Marine Lab in Aberdeen for a long time, which then became Marine Scotland. And he eventually became chief scientist at Marine Scotland. And then in 2018, the Scottish Government formed the, if I get this right, the Office of the Chief Scientific Advisor Marine. And Colin was the first holder of that post. And possibly to our advantage, he gave that up recently, which probably means that he's got time to come along and speak to us. Otherwise, I'm not sure he would have. So we're very lucky to have him here tonight, because I doubt you'll find anybody better placed in Scotland to actually cover the issues that he's going to speak to us about, which is human impacts on Scotland's seas. Now, if you have questions for Colin, he will take those at the end, but can you please put them into the chat box? And if they occur to you during the talk, just pop them in the chat box and we'll pick them up as we go. So you don't want to listen to me, you want to listen to Professor Colin Moffat, who's currently at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. So over to you, Colin, if you would like to share your screen.
Thank you very much, Claire, and good evening, everybody. I'll just start the process of sharing my screen. Okay, so hopefully now what you can see is my title slide. Is that right, Claire? Is that what's up?
Yep, that's what's up.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you very much to Claire and colleagues in Perth for inviting me along tonight to give this talk entitled Turning the Tide of Human Impact on Scotland's Seas. And I think the first point I want to make is that the ocean is the life source of our planet, and it's vital for healthy human societies and a thriving world economy. And that's sort of the thrust of what I want to say. But what I'd like to do overall is to take you on a wee journey tonight, a journey which starts with a wee bit about our ocean, what's in our ocean, the criticality of our ocean to life on Earth. And then I'd like to illustrate the impact that we all as human beings are having on our ocean and the consequences of that impact. And finally, I'd like to share with you a wee bit about what we can do as humans to reduce that impact, with a warning that actually if we don't reduce the impact that we are having on our environment, then the consequences will be very, very significant. So that's what I'd like to do. And as Claire mentioned, I'm happy to take questions at the end. So the first thing I would like to do is perhaps share with you something which, if any of you are a geography teacher or study geography, we're told that there were so many oceans in the earth. I'm going to tell you that there's one. There is one interconnected ocean, as illustrated by this view of the planet, which I like to call Planet Ocean, because of course 70% approximately of the surface of the Earth is covered by seawater. And what I'm showing here is actually that we have one interconnected ocean. And this is not often an angle that we look at the planet from, but in essence, we're looking from underneath the planet. You can see the A for Antarctica, the G for Greenland in the top left. And I've also marked where Perth is so that you can get your bearings. But what we have in reality on our planet is one interconnected ocean that is a series of basins. And the basins, of course, have the names that we're familiar with: Arctic, Atlantic, Pacific, Southern Basin, Indian Basin. But the key for pointing this out is that what this means is that the ocean is genuinely interconnected. In other words, what happens in one part of the ocean will impact potentially at some stage on another part of the ocean. And the other point here is that the ocean circulates around our planet. And one of the key things it does is it moves significant amounts of heat around the planet. And if we go to the Atlantic basin, which you see in the left-hand side, then actually a key outcome of the movement of what we call the North Atlantic current is that Perth is 5 degrees C or so warmer for its latitude than it would be without the North Atlantic current taking the heat from the equatorial regions northwards. And this happens because actually the Arctic is a very, very special area in terms of the global circulation, and leading up to the Arctic is very, very special, because what happens is we have this hot or this warm, salty water drawn north. It goes up to the Arctic, it then cools down, it sinks, and it comes out at a lower level and moves south. And this pump system is one of the key pumps that actually moves the global circulation of water. But what it also indicates, again, is that this big mass of water is not static, it is moving. So it is moving heat around the globe, it is moving nutrients, nitrates, silicates, phosphates around. It allows for there to be upwelling from the deep waters. And so we've got a very mobile, single, interconnected ocean. So that's the first point that I want you to take away. The second point that I want you to take away is that the ocean is absolutely teeming with life of many shapes and many sizes. I've shown there on the left-hand side of the slide, Emilianii huxleyi, which is a phytoplankton at 4 micrometers, a very, very small critter indeed. But actually, there are the viruses and the bacteria which are even smaller than Emilianii. And actually, to give you an idea of the scale, you could probably get 20 of these phytoplankton across, widthwise, a single human hair. So that gives you an idea of the size of some of the smaller creatures that are in our seas. There, I've also got zooplankton, Leucotiara octina, and this can grow to up to 15 millimeters. And I think this is just, you should start hopefully being amazed by these shapes and forms that we have in the ocean. And this zooplankton, I think, is an amazing creature. I think personally it could be used as a model for the next TARDIS, because it just looks like something out of Doctor Who. So we've got phytoplankton, we've got zooplankton, and then we've got animals that you're perhaps more familiar with in terms of the herring gull. Most people, of course, call it a seagull, but there are many different types of seagulls. In this case, the herring gull, which is perhaps some people would say the bane of life of people in Aberdeen. But it is a very substantially sized a gull. But also we have other sized creatures. We have cod, of course, and hopefully many of you like a nice piece of cod, very common in the North Sea, although less so than perhaps used to be. And that's a fish that is near the seabed, whereas on the right-hand side, we've got herring, which is a fish that tends to swim in the water column. And also in that picture, you'll see a couple of more substantially sized animals, the grey seal, and of course, the blue whale. And that picture of a blue whale, unfortunately not off Scotland. All the rest of the animals, yes, you get off Scotland. We don't see many blue whales off Scotland. That particular one, I was fortunate enough to see off Iceland. Now, some of these creatures, the seals, the whales, the seagull, the herring gull, you'll be very familiar with. Along the bottom are animals that you're perhaps less familiar with, but equally important in terms of making up the complexity of life that lives in the seas around Scotland. And one of the things that I would emphasize is you don't have to go away from Scotland to see animals of phenomenal color. Look at the flame shell there. And that shell is approximately 4 centimeters across. And its brilliant orange color is something which really is, I think, just amazing to see. And when you consider that they exist in a habitat of maybe 100 to 250 million shells, and actually we are only finding some of these habitats, which may only be a kilometer or 2 kilometers off our shores, we're only finding them now. But the important thing about these flame shells is that they form a habitat which provides a home for many, many other animals. And so these sort of habitat forming species are very, very important. Nephrops are something that probably many of you have munched in the past. They enjoy burrowing in mud. And again, we have substantial nephrops fisheries off Scotland. But hopefully what this illustrates to you is that we go from very, very small creatures, from the plants that actually are the basis of the food web within the marine systems, to animals of much bigger size and indeed complexity. So let's just explore this just a wee bit more. Let's look at a few numbers here. The population of Perth is about 47,430. So that's the population of Perth. Now, the global human population increases every single day. But at 12:14 today, it was just over 7.9 billion. So that's the global human population. And just to give you some context, back in 1804, there was only 1 billion humans. And it took 123 years for there to be 2 billion humans. That came about in 1927. But it only took 33 years until 1960 for it to become 3 billion, and 14 years for it to become 4 billion. Over the last few years, it's taken about 12, 13 years to add on another billion. But we reckon the human population will get to 8 billion in 2023. However, this number pales into insignificance when you look at the number of viruses in the ocean. There's a lot of zeros after the 4, and that number is actually 4 nonillion. And that is the number of viruses that we estimate are living in the ocean at any one time. 4 nonillion. And if you look at it, there's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30 zeros after the 4. That's a big, 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 big number. But the other thing I'd like to point out is I've gone through the increase in global human population and illustrated that over the last, say, since the mid-1970s, we've put on about 1 billion people every 12, 13, 14 years. And that's having a consequence for the ocean. So what I'm illustrating here is 2 points. First of all, that the global population is increasing, and relative to the increases in the 1800s and the early 1900s, we are seeing about 1 billion people every 12 to 14 years additional on the planet. And that's having an impact on the condition of the marine environment. But on the other hand, relative to our ocean, in fact, it's 7 billion is quite a small number when you look at the number of viruses in the ocean at 4 nonillion. Now, I'd want to come back a wee bit about size and just contrast and compare what we've got. And I've gone back to E. huxleyi again. And I'm using this as a representative species of, in this case, a calcifying phytoplankton. And this is an electron micrograph of the coccolithophore. And the reason it's called a coccolithophore is because what you see looking at the picture on the left there are small calcium carbonate plates, and they're known as coccoliths. And actually, each of these coccoliths is a wee plate. And when this particular phytoplankton dies, the calcium carbonate plates fall to the seabed. And actually, these are the plates that make up the White Cliffs of Dover. And when you see that each coccolith is only about 2 micrometers, so that's very, very small. So across a human hair, you could get about 30 of these individual, or 40 maybe even of these individual coccoliths. To have gone from there to produce the White Cliffs of Dover, there must have been a lot of them around, and there's still a lot of them around. But again, what this illustrates is how life in the ocean is impacting on life on land. When we go from that to one of the largest creatures ever to have been on the planet, the blue whale, the factor is 7.5 million. When we get to this phenomenal animal, up to 30 meters in length. And my son and I, we went looking for blue whales, blue whales, humpback whales, north of Iceland. And we were fortunate enough to see this phenomenal animal. And when this creature sort of went gliding past the boat we were in, it was just awe-inspiring. I'd have to say, my son got the better picture, but I'll give him that, because overall, it was just amazing to see this 30-meter animal glide past. And to give you some other idea of how big it is, its aorta, the main blood vessel coming out the heart, is basically the size of a dinner plate in diameter. And compare that to our one, which is more sort of the size of a standard hose type thing. So it's got the size of a dinner plate. Its heart is the size of a golf buggy. So that gives you an idea of the size of it. And that heart pumps about 264 liters of blood every second. And when you see those sort of numbers, the coccolithophores on the left that resulted in the White Cliffs of Dover, the whale on the right, 30 meters, with a heart that pumps 264 liters of blood per second, and all the creatures in between. And of course, the smaller viruses and bacteria, you suddenly realize what an amazing environment we have off our coasts of Scotland. In terms of how long creatures live in the marine environment, lifespan is again something of varied and large numbers. On the left, I have again phytoplankton, in this case a Serratia furca, which is a marine dinoflagellate, different to our coccolithophores and also to another group of phytoplankton called diatoms. And they sort of live, and it's a bit, it's not straightforward in terms of phytoplankton living and dying, because what happens is these phytoplankton divide. But depending on the conditions, they may take hours or days to divide. But we could say, for simplicity, that phytoplankton live round about hours to days. Contrast that with the ocean quahog that we have a picture of there in the middle of the slide. Now, the green dots on the map above show where we get ocean quahogs around Scotland. And the key thing about this is this particular ocean quahog could have been alive when Shakespeare was writing A Midsummer Night's Dream. Think about that this ocean quahog could actually have been a wee critter when Shakespeare was writing A Midsummer Night's Dream. Because these mollusks can live for more than 500 years. Pretty phenomenal. And in fact, they live in what we call sandy, muddy sediments in the inshore and subtidal areas. And as far as we know, they are actually the longest living mollusk on the planet. Unfortunately, they're currently in decline in terms of their existence. But at the moment, we still have quite a number. And how do we know that they live to 500 years? And it's a wee bit like tree rings, except in the ocean quahog's case, it is shell rings. And we simply count the shell rings. So that's how we can age. So we've got animals, that the phytoplankton there that live, in this case a plant, lives hours to days, up to a mollusk that lives for greater than 500 years. On the right, we have the Greenland shark. And in fact, the Greenland shark takes more than 100 years to mature, and like the ocean quahog, can live for more than 500 years. So again, that shark in the picture may have known Shakespeare. We don't know, but you never know what stranger things have happened. But there we go, that at the end of the day, 500 years old. But if an animal takes 100 years to mature, and if through human activities, we don't allow any of these animals to reach 100 years, the impacts on that particular animal could be significant. Similarly, if we trawl over the ocean quahogs and basically crush them, then again, survival is an issue. So we've looked at lifespan, we've looked at size, and one, of course, other thing that we have to think about is the deep, because our ocean is obviously from the coast, where we've just got a few centimeters of water, to very, very deep water. And of course, to the Mariana Trench, where we're about 11 kilometers deep. That actually means that we could put Everest, Mount Everest, into the Mariana Trench, and it still wouldn't stick up above the water. Now, we don't have waters as deep as that around Scotland. What we do have off the west of Scotland is the Rockall Trough. And in the Rockall Trough, we've got waters around about 1,000, 2,000 meters in depth. And in those depths, there are still animals, there are still environments which are not dead areas, but very, very alive areas. And think about it. I don't know how many of you have gone swimming, but if you go into a 15-meter swimming pool and you dive down that 50 meters, you very quickly feel the pressure on your ears. And atmospheric pressure is about 101 kilopascals. And for every 10 meters you go down, the pressure increases by about 100 kilopascals. What that means is that that round-nosed grenadier at 1,300 meters is experiencing a pressure of just over 13,000 kilopascals. And that's off the Hebrides of Scotland. And so we've got this, again, very different environment from the environment experienced by those animals that are living up near the surface. But also it's dark down there because light doesn't permeate to those sort of depths. And so we have a dark environment. But we also have an environment where various either hydrocarbons or, in fact, what we call the black smoker, so various other chemicals can come out of the ground. And in fact, the species of clam here was a new species discovered by staff at the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen. And it was discovered where we had what's called a cold seep. And this species is particular to that cold seep off Rockall Bank. But again, what I'm illustrating here is we are still finding new species. We're still finding known species in new locations around the shores of Scotland, which again illustrates that we still don't know too much about what's going on in the seas around Scotland. We do know some, but we don't know everything. I'd like to just illustrate again the colour and the variation. These pictures were taken summer this year by a group surveying the Diamond Cave on the west side of Fair Isle. And what we have here is the Devonshire Cup coral. And the Devonshire Cup coral is a relatively solitary individual. Very occasionally you will find it existing in a cluster of 2 to 4, but actually it's quite a solitary coral. And it has up to, you can see the tentacles with the little sort of baubles on the end. It can have up to 80 of them. But look at the bright green colour in the middle. Now, if you were to go to Loch Carron, you would find, again, Devonshire Cup corals, but you would find pink ones in Loch Carron. This particular one is in, as I say, the Diamond Cave, which is a 200-metre long cave on Fair Isle. And by the way, one of the other things they found when they were in this cave was what's called baked bean sea squirts. And they're called baked bean sea squirts because they look like baked beans. So we get all these sort of things in the sea. Google baked bean sea squirt after the talk. And yes, there you will see we have got everything in the marine environment, even baked beans. On the right-hand side, we have a squat lobster, but also a closed beadlet anemone. And again, look at the intensity of the red colour in there. So we've got a varied, coloured, very intense sort of phenomenal environment. The last sort of perhaps slightly unusual creature that I'd like to show you, because I do have to move on to the human impacts, is this one. And this particular creature is known as Cryosphere, and it is, in fact, invisible. It lives in the open ocean, and it is totally translucent. In other words, you can see through it. It's a crustacean, just as Nephrops is a crustacean and crabs is a crustacean. But I'm glad to say I got in touch with Karen Osborne at the Smithsonian Institute and said, I'm giving this talk to people in Perth in Scotland. Can you send me, please, one of your pictures? And she sent this the next day. And basically, we can see this animal because it's been picked up by the flash of the camera. But normally, it's totally invisible. And what it actually means is it's better than an invisibility cloak. And what they've discovered is that the shell is covered in minute spheres as well as tiny hair-like structures. And what this coating does is it cancels out 99.9% of the light reflections. The actual size of this creature, it's about 18 centimeters long, and it's translucent. And in the dark, it is invisible. What you can see there is sort of in the orangey part at the front, on the left-hand side, that is its eye. In the middle, you see, just behind the eye, there's a blue, almost vertical line, and that's the start of its gut. But the reality is that this animal is basically invisible. So there's a problem. How do you find a mate when you cannot be seen? And we still don't know. So there's lots of interesting things about the marine environment. Ultimately, as humans, we get many, many goods and services from the ocean. And I've given some examples. I've shown you what we have in terms of some of the very unusual creatures, all depths, all sizes. But actually, we all know about getting oxygen from the trees in the Amazon. But actually, 50% of our oxygen comes from the marine environment. The marine environment also provides us with some very, very important drugs. For example, the cone snail. There was a chemical from the cone snail, which is now made synthetically, called ziconotide. And ziconotide is a drug for treating chronic pain in humans. And it is a very, very, very effective drug. At the same time, some of the sponges that we find in the sea produce very, very effective anti-cancer agents. And I mentioned the baked bean sea squirt, but another type of sea squirt produces a compound which is now synthetically prepared, known as Yondelis. And it is using a treatment for advanced soft tissue sarcoma. So actually, not only is the marine environment providing us also with food, with a transport system, but it's providing us with new drugs. It's providing us with oxygen. It's also providing us with well-being, because we've known for years that a trip to the seaside is just something phenomenal. And it's actually now being shown by sociologists that people living on the coast tend to live a wee bit longer and tend to be happier than people living inland. So I'm sorry to the people of Perth, although I know you have a harbour, but you probably count as being a bit inland. So I live about 8 minutes from the cliffs, so I'm a very happy jabbie. But also it provides tourism, it provides recreation. It also provides storm protection because corals, Great Barrier Reef, corals in the Caribbean, mangroves, they provide natural storm protection. Take them away, or they're damaged by climate change and we lose that storm protection. So hopefully what I've managed to show you is that not only is the sea full of wonderful creatures, but the provisioning in terms of seaweed, energy, be it hydrocarbon energy or be it renewable energy, provisioning in terms of food, fish and shellfish that we eat, provisioning in terms of sand and gravel for construction, or be it in terms of supporting water cycling, nutrient cycling, habitats for species, or whether it's in regulating, because not only does it give up carbon dioxide, give up oxygen, but actually our ocean has absorbed about a quarter of the additional carbon dioxide that has been produced as a result of anthropogenic activities, and about 90% of the additional heat. The ocean has buffered us against the impacts of climate change and is key in climate and temperature regulation. So it's actually fundamental to life on Earth. So that's my introduction to the ocean, the one single ocean and the seas around Scotland. What I'd like to do now is to go on and mention a wee bit about human impact, the impact that we are having on the ocean. And the first thing I'd like to speak a wee bit about is microparticles, and in this case, microplastics. And what you see here is a catamaran designed by Mary Russell and the engineering department at the Marine Laboratory. And what this does is it samples the top 10 centimeters of water in the sea, and it's towed behind our research vessel. And on the right is a picture, a map, which shows all the sampling sites. And little yellow dots mean that we didn't pick up any microplastics. And we, in fact, had a number of samples, about 400, of which about a third contained no microplastics. But that means 2/3 did. And as you get a darker color and a larger circle, then what you see is the number of microplastics per square kilometer of sea surface increases. And in areas such as the Solway, the Forth, the Clyde, but I'm glad to say not up the Tay, we didn't come up to Perth actually, we're getting in the region of 70,000 microparticles per square kilometer. And even when we go off to the deep waters to the west of Scotland in Rockall, we are finding microparticles. In fact, microparticles were found in every coastal region and in every offshore region that was sampled. And so microparticles are becoming ubiquitous in our marine system. Plastics more generally are a significant issue. And the picture here is of a fulmer, and it's actually, when I'm not sharing my screen, I have a fulmer behind me. But fulmers tend to dive down into the water and pick up plastics and then swallow them. Once they've swallowed them, they can't regurgitate them. And courtesy of Ewan Edwards at Marine Scotland, what I'm showing here is a picture of what came out of one fulmer's tummy. Ironically, we're using this as an indicator of the ecology around Scotland and indeed the whole of the UK and the North Sea in respect of plastics in the environment. And what we've done as part of the OSPR Commission is we've set a target that we do not want more than 10% of birds to have more than 0.1 grams of plastic. But if you look at the data, and Scottish Islands are the grey lines, we are running at about 65% of fulmars have more than 10%. Sorry, more than 0.1 grams of plastic. In other words, we are well above the 10%. And indeed, whether it is the Channel, which was the highest, or East England, or indeed the Scottish Islands, or indeed the Southeast North Sea, what we're seeing is that we're almost running consistently in terms of round about 60% of the birds have more than 0.1 grams of plastic. And it's, although in some areas has decreased, so for example, the Channel, in areas such as Southeast North Sea, Scotland, Skagerrak, which is on the east side of the North Sea, it is not decreased. As you go further north to likes of North Norway, Svalbard, yes, the numbers come down, but none of the numbers are below our target of 10%. The other thing is that fulmars, and this is an assessment done in 2020, fulmars are currently in decline with a reduction in numbers between 2011 and 2018 of about 25%. So the conclusion of this quick forage into plastics is that plastic waste is present throughout the seas and is a potential threat to marine life. Whether it is fibers, whether it is the plastics that we find in fulmar stomachs, or indeed whether it is these pre-production pellets that we have there, also known as Nerdles. And if any of you have nothing to do this weekend, find a sandy beach and go for a Nerdle hunt. And then you go onto the Nerdle page and you can report the Nerdles that you find. They're about 5 millimeters in diameter. And there are some beaches that at times have been white, looking like snow covered, when in fact they've been covered in Nerdles, these pre-production pellets. Not a human impact that we want to be in any way proud of, and something that we really need to be thinking about doing something about. The other thing I want to speak about is contamination. Contamination by, in this case, natural elements, whether it be lead, cadmium, or mercury. And these are natural. They're not human synthesized, but natural elements can be toxic if biota experience them at atypical concentrations. And these atypical concentrations are often brought about by human processes. Lead, of course, lead in petrol was a big issue, not such a big issue now. But mercury, cadmium, also from mining activities. And cadmium, like mercury, is on what's called the red list of substances. These are highlighted where they're of particular concern in the environment. And in fact, for humans, the most significant exposure of humans to cadmium is from tobacco smoke. So for those of you, if any of you do smoke, you get a dose of cadmium. But cadmium is carcinogenic, and experimental exposure to cadmium can result in birth defects, damage to reproductive systems, and long-term exposure can cause anemia, kidney damage, loss of sense of smell, and staining of your teeth. So what we find is, however, that through human activities, we are increasing the concentration of these compounds in the marine environment. Then if we eat material from the marine environment, food from the marine environment, there's a chance that we ourselves can become contaminated. Now, it's not all bad news. And the effect of lead being removed from petrol, in fact, has resulted in the plot we see 1990 to 1995 in blue, 2010 to 2014, total inputs of mercury, cadmium, and lead, mercury on the left, cadmium in the middle, lead on the right. And the inputs of lead have dropped dramatically. Now, inputs of mercury and cadmium have also dropped, both in terms of riverine and atmospheric. So that's good. But one of the things I'm going to come to in a minute is in terms of recycling of some of these elements. But key here is that, in fact, now for the North Sea, secondary atmospheric pollution from resuspended material, and indeed from sources outside the Northeast Atlantic, are now the major sources of airborne pollution to the greater North Sea. Again, we're tying in with this mobility, in this case, atmospheric mobility. But secondary atmospheric pollution from resuspended material is a cause. And in this case, this is to the Northeast Atlantic. However, when we think about persistent organic pollutants and pharmaceuticals, in this case, often much of what we've produced has been exported to the Arctic. Now, humans have high ingenuity, and this high ingenuity has resulted in the creation of an absolute plethora of organic chemicals which serve a human purpose, but which adversely impact the marine environment. We've produced chemicals that are designed to kill things, that are designed to alter biological processes, that are designed to make human life safer, that are designed to facilitate various processes. We also have chemicals that are byproducts of a human process. And we, of course, produce this range of pharmaceuticals. And the key thing is that many, many, many of these chemicals end up in the ocean. And so what we have in the ocean is a huge cocktail of persistent organic pollutants, pharmaceuticals, personal care products, and the elements like lead, cadmium, mercury that I mentioned a second ago. What this means is that all the biota is being exposed to a range of chemicals. And these chemicals are designed to do something. They're designed to kill. They're designed to alter biological processes. And so it's not surprising when you find that the biological processes in the marine environment are being altered. Not only that, but in the marine environment, we have a complex food web. We start with the primary producers. In this case, Karenia mikimoto is the phytoplankton, the primary producer, catches the light and takes the nutrients and the carbon dioxide and makes it into life. That's eaten by a primary consumer. The primary consumer is eaten by a secondary consumer. The secondary consumer by a tertiary consumer, and the tertiary consumer by a quaternary consumer. And what happens is that, like the persistent organic pollutants, as we go up the consumers' levels, the concentration is increased. So by the time we get to the seals, the whales, the seabirds, their concentrations are very, very significant. As an example of concentrations around Scotland, we've developed assessment criteria. In this case, we're looking at a polychlorinated biphenyl, and polychlorinated biphenyls are considered to be among the most ubiquitous and resistant pollutants in the global ecosystem. They were banned from production last century. They were banned from use slightly more recently. But yet, in 2018, there was a whale washed up on the islands of Scotland. And that whale, it was a killer whale, had the largest, highest concentration of PCBs ever found in a killer whale. Many, 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 many years after the production and use of this chemical has been banned. The other thing is that we try to look and assess, well, okay, when might we likely see effects and what's happening to concentrations. So in Scotland, we've actually led on developing status assessments, and we've developed things called background assessment concentrations and environmental assessment criteria. And environmental assessment criteria are concentrations above which we would expect to see biological effects in specific marine animals. If you look at the map on the left for chlorinated biphenyl 118, and 118 is what's known as a dioxin-like polychlorinated biphenyl and is one of the more toxic of the family of compounds because it behaves a bit like dioxin. In the Forth, in the Tay, beside Aberdeen, in Montrose Bay, we have concentrations above the environmental assessment criteria. And this assessment was done in the last few years. So this is not an old assessment. This is a relatively new assessment. Not only that, but if you look above Edinburgh, above the R and the G, the triangle is pointing upwards. In other words, in the muscles, from there, the concentrations are increasing. Good news, if you look at the Tay and come out of the Tay and start moving around 5, there's a downward arrow. And there's a downward arrow beside Aberdeen. In other cases, there is no trend. But what this shows is that we still have concentrations above 118 in blue mussels around the Scottish coast. Fishing, we all know about fishing. We know that fishing happens. Now this is fishing pressure over time for haddock. And what I'm using here is I'm using fishing mortality as the indicator. And we can measure fishing mortality. And in this case, we're looking at it in fish that are 2 to 4 years old, haddock that are 2 to 4 years old. And we set various criteria. We have F-lim, so that the limit of where we would like the fishing mortality never to go above. But actually, we put in a precautionary value, FPA, which is the dotted line below F-lim. But we actually have a value which we call FMSY. And this is the fishing mortality estimated to result in the maximum sustainable yield of haddock over a long time period. This is for North Sea and West of Scotland. And what you see is that between the period 1972 and basically almost present day, fishing mortality has declined, but it has been above the long-term value that we believe it needs to be below for long-term sustainability. We've been above what we actually call F-lim up until about 2002, from 1972 to 2002. Since then, we've oscillated, sometimes going above F-lim, sometimes coming below the precautionary value, but never really making it below FMSY. So again, this is a human consequence. And if you start, and overfishing is an issue. Now, in Scotland, masses has been done by the industry and by government to improve the situation. And in fact, we are seeing improvements in the situation, but we still have some way to go. Now, noise, sound is a form of pollution, it's a form of energy. And as we develop renewable energy, as we have ships moving around, we have pile driving, we have ships noise. And what's been done in Scotland is right down the east coast from Rutherun down to St Abbs is a series of sounding buoys, and they are listening out for sounds. But let me just let you hear a sound of a pile driver in the sea at 2 kilometers. you hear this thud. And again, another thud. Now that's pile driving at 2 kilometers, quite distinct, quite a firm thud that you hear. At 30 kilometers, yes, you can still hear it, but it sounds very different. So that's, again, pile driving, but this time at 30 kilometers. Quite a different sound. A ship going overhead. What these are artificial noises. Now, nature produces noises. The sea is not silent, and a blue whale's heartbeat can be heard 2 miles from the animal. Is that not phenomenal, that you can hear a whale's heartbeat? It is the size, of course, as I said, of a golf buggy, but you can hear it at 2 miles. But the humpback whale's song, we still don't fully understand it, but we do think it might be the basis of wide social interaction amongst the male whales. And if sound is being used for social interaction, what is the consequence of these anthropogenically produced noises? The question is indeed a question, because we don't yet have all the answers. Now, many of you have known of COP26. It's been what's been happening in Glasgow for the last 2 weeks, finished at the weekend. Why did we have COP26? COP26 came about because of the increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere produced by us. If you look at this plot here, and this plot really does worry me. If you look, we're going back 800,000 years, and this data has been got from ice cores. And what you see is this is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 800,000 years. And it's oscillated round about between 180 parts per million and 280 parts per million. And when it's been at 180 parts per million, we've had an ice age. And when it's been at 280 parts per million, we've had what's called an interglacial period or a warm period. If you zoom over to the right-hand side of the plot, then what you see here is a small double-headed arrow, which indicates the last ice age. And we've come out of the last ice age, but that's perfectly normal. That's what we do. We cycle through. And we were on an upward trajectory, but we've been on an upward trajectory in the past. But then look what has happened. Suddenly, we have gone from oscillating between 180 to 280 parts per million to a concentration of yesterday at Mauna Loa in Hawaii, which is one of the main carbon dioxide monitoring stations for global monitoring of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, to 414.79 parts per million, which in itself was more than 2 parts per million higher than the same time last year. And the carbon dioxide oscillates throughout a year. And earlier this year, on the 3rd of April 2021, we had the highest concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere at Mauna Loa for the last 800,000 years at 421.21 parts per million dry air. The last time the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations were this high was actually estimated to be more than 3 million years ago, when the temperature was 2 to 3 degrees higher than the pre-industrial era, and when sea level was 15 to 25 meters higher than it is today. If you look at the table on the right, the purple table, then actually what this shows is that between 1800 and 1959, and we take around 1800 as the start of the industrial era, the change in atmospheric CO2 at Mauna Loa, the change in atmospheric CO2 was about 33.06 parts per million. Since then, 1960 to 1979, it went up by 19.98. 1980 to 1999 went up by 29.14. 2000 to 2019, up by 42.32. In other words, we are on an accelerating trajectory. And that accelerating trajectory coincides with increases in the human population. What you actually see is that the carbon dioxide concentration has increased more in the period 2000 to 2019 than it did between 1800 and 1959. It is a problem of today. It is a problem that we are very much, me, you all listening, have contributed to. The consequences of this are the global mean surface temperature will increase, and it has increased. Sea level is increasing. In the last century or so, it increased by about 20 centimeters. We expect it to increase by another 20 centimeters over the next 20, 30 years. Accelerating profile. Deoxygenation is occurring. In other words, as water warms, it holds less water. If there's less water, if there's less oxygen in the water, the animals are stressed. Also, if they're stressed, they respire more quickly, giving out more carbon dioxide. Sea temperatures are going up. That also causes the animals to be stressed. And the other thing that's happening is as the carbon dioxide dissolves in the water, it is actually acidifying the water. The pH is dropping, and it's dropping such that there's an impact. The other thing is, and this is one of my big worries, taking an average, saying, well, we don't want it to go above 1.5 degrees C average is not that helpful. Because what you see here is produced by NASA for October this year, and it's the Land Ocean Temperature Index. And what we're looking at here is the anomaly relative to the period 1951 to 1980, and the anomaly in temperature. And if you look at the Arctic, and if you look at the scale along the bottom, then what you see are figures in excess of 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees centigrade. And with the red, it's 2 to 4 degrees difference. The orange is 1 to 2 degrees. Now, yes, there are some cold areas as well, but these cold areas were never reaching the purple. We're occasionally reaching the darker blue colors. But what this shows is across the globe, we have a disproportionate impact on the poles. Remember I mentioned global circulation. The pole, the Arctic is key to that global circulation. If we change the condition, the type of the water, in other words, we're melting the ice, that means the water is what drives the pump. If we change what drives the pump, we change the flow. If we change with the flow, we change the temperature coming north, and we ultimately change the heat. Now, folks, I'm aware that the time is cracking on, so I'm just going to mention that we are in a bit of a pickle. And the key thing also is that we have a loss in the variety of plants and animals occurring as a result of many of the things I've mentioned